Hello and welcome to the Spinal Cord Injury Forum. My name is Jeannie Hoffman. I'm a clinical psychologist in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine and the director of the Northwest Regional Spinal Cord Injury System here at the University of Washington. Tonight we are very pleased to welcome three individuals who will be discussing three different models of residential living and alternative and supported community living. We were interested in this, of course, for people with spinal cord injury, but we recognize that this is a broad category. I mean, there's a lot of new models, and in fact, one of the models that we'll hear about tonight is really thinking about people who are aging and aging in place and aging with disability. So, without further ado, let me do some introductions. We have Mike Rosenbaum, who will talk about Quad Inc., which is a company that offers affordable, accessible housing and personal care in Portland, Oregon. We'll then invite up Mark Roth, who will discuss Luna Azul, which is a residential community for adults with both physical and intellectual disabilities in Arizona. And then we'll end with Denise Klein, who's going to talk about Wider Horizons, which is a virtual village for individuals aging in the Seattle Central District. And so again, these are all three intentional communities, meaning they're created by individuals looking for solutions to the challenges or barriers of living independently in your own home, in your own community. And we hope you find them interesting and potentially even inspiring. So please join me in welcoming our first guest, Mike.
Thank you. As Jeannie said, my name's Mike Rosenbaum with Quad Inc., which is an acronym for Quadriplegics United Against Dependency, and we encourage and promote self-reliant living. And our operations manager, Reed, is with me here, and he'll do some follow-up towards the end. And I'm on the board of Quad Inc., and I also was a resident of Quad Inc. when I first got injured back in 1986. I stayed there for about a year and a half in 1986 and 1987. So Quad's mission as a nonprofit organization serving the disabled community, Quad is dedicated to advancing the rights and independence of severely physically disabled adults through the provision of low-cost, accessible housing and support services that promote self-reliance and self-sufficiency in all aspects of daily living. It's a lot different than a nursing center. The unique services offered through Quad play to the strengths of the individuals who live there and provide independence and self-reliance within a totally functionally accessible environment. Quad has consistently provided a unique model of shared attendant care for a fraction of the cost of a nursing home or foster care. So a little bit about Quad's history. You can see up here, Quad was founded in '75 by E.W. Bud Meyers. He was an appliance repairman who suffered a spinal cord injury as a result of diving in the Sandy River in Portland, Oregon. Bud realized that there was no accessible housing or supportive services that existed in the Portland area to help newly injured quadriplegics adjust to their injury and transition into a life with a disability. Bud was able to bring together the community resources needed to open Meyers Court in 1980, the first independent living center in the nation not affiliated with a hospital or rehab center. And actually Meyers Court is the only facility Quad had when I first got injured, and that's where I'd lived early on with my disability. So we'll talk a little bit about Quad's accessible, affordable housing. And as I just mentioned, Quad has developed and operates 5 independent living apartment buildings. Accessible design features include accessible roll-under counters in the kitchen, appliances, sinks, roll-in showers, overhead lifts in the bedroom, floor plans that are open and accessible, and have a variety of other features specifically for wheelchair users. So the first facility that opened, as you can see up here, was Meyers Court, and that was Quad's first building, built in 1980 as a model for barrier-free living. And as I mentioned earlier, it was the first independent living center in the nation, not affiliated with a hospital or a rehabilitation center. And here's some photos. And if you look at the photos, you can see that the hallway in the top center, it's enclosed. So if a resident or a renter comes home, once they get inside, they're out of the weather and they can get into their apartment without having to sit in the pouring rain. Or if they need assistance because they or a higher level quad or something like that, they can get an attendant to help them open the door and get into their residence. And then on the top right, there's a shared common area there's a picture of. And then on the bottom left, it shows the courtyard and some of the garden beds out there for the residents. And on the bottom right, there's a picture of the kitchenette, and you can see the roll-under sink and counters in there. The next complex that opened up was Rolling Green, which opened in 1997. There's 24 accessible apartment units in Rolling Green, 19 one-bedroom units, 5 two-bedroom units, and an on-site manager's unit. There's a picture of Rolling Green. It shows the patio that's accessible and has a barbecue for the residents. And on the top right, you can see a little bit of the parking. It has plenty of accessible parking. The third apartment complex was Central Station Apartments, and Central Station has 23 fully accessible apartments. 16 of them are one-bedroom units, and 6 are two-bedroom units. And it also has an on-site manager's unit. The fourth, actually here's a few pictures. Same, on the top left you can see the under-the-counter accessibility in the kitchen. The hallways are the same. All our facilities are that way. They have enclosed hallways once you enter the facility so you can get to your residence without being out in the weather. Burnside Station was the fourth facility opened by Quad Inc., and they opened in 2004. They're located on 160th Avenue in East Portland, just 2 blocks from the 162nd Street Max Light Rail Station. So there's another one of our facilities right on the light rail line for getting around town if you're not able to drive. And here's a few pictures of the Burnside Station, pretty much like the other facilities. And then Station 162 is the newest project that Quad just finished, and it had completed in 2017. And this new complex offers below market rents to individuals and families that have income below 60% of the median income. 25 one-bedroom units are specially designed to maximize independence of residents who use wheelchairs, and 19 units are targeted for elderly residents. And the 19 apartments, while they're not accessible, they're what's called adaptable, with a focus on aging in place. So the adaptability is they're designed to where the kitchen cabinets and stuff that are under the counters can easily be taken out to convert them to be accessible. And here's a couple photos from 162. And again, on the top left, you can see the under the counter access, and the top middle, the enclosed corridors. And on the top right, the patio, it's all accessible with concrete. And then on the bottom left, there's a common area. And on the bottom right, you can see how they have pocket doors, so they are easy to slide open and close to allow for easy access. So a little bit more about affordable, accessible housing. Quad housing is very high in demand and generally has a waiting list of a year or more for each of our facilities. And Quad also is a HUD housing provider, and there are specific procedures, policies, and regulations Quad needs to follow to stay in compliance with HUD. So now a little bit more about the services provided with Quad, and more specifically shared tenant care, which is what I think is one of the greatest benefits of living there. So Quad offers shared tenant care. Residents who elect the optional shared tenant care services can get assistance for activities they cannot physically do for themselves. They can choose from a menu of daily services that might include wake up or bedtime care, for instance, getting help, getting dressed, getting out of bed, showering, going to bed. Residents choose and direct the services themselves, ensuring they receive only help and support they really need. While quad inks attendants are not medical professionals, they do receive special training in the specific care of spinal cord injured patients. And so, like if you look at some of the menu of services like cooking and medical assistance and whatnot, that's the great thing about quad. So if you live there, you're independent. It's not like a nursing home or a residential care facility where they cook something and say, here's what for dinner. You're independent, so you go out and you do your own shopping, you buy your own groceries, and if you can't cook your own dinner, you need help, then you sign up and you have someone come in at a specific time and come in and help you, and you direct what you want to eat, and you direct how you want it cooked. You know, do you want it broiled? Do you want it cooked in a frying pan? Do you want it medium rare, etc.? So it's really unique in that way. And the same with the get up care and going to bed. You know, they offer assistance with anything from bowel care to, you know, changing your catheter, things like that. So I was going to have Reed come up and talk a little bit more about some of the SCI-specific form questions that were referred to as from the SCI advisory.
Use this one if you could just speak up.
Yeah, definitely. I'm Reed Jackson. I'm actually Director of Operations for Quad Inc. And I actually spend quite a bit of time with managers going through all this on a, seems like a very frequent basis. So who is eligible to live in Quad Inc. and what is the screening process? We have actually two different programs built within funding. We have our HUD project and we have LIHTC, which is low income housing tax credit. And they both use the same tables for income levels. LIHTC tends to be a little bit higher levels, but once we reach a certain threshold, then we have to kind of look at like assets and stuff, much like you would have to with Medicaid. But we're not worried about you having assets of over $2,000. The screening process, we do a very thorough, just like you would as a landlord in any other residential community. We also do screening, you know, on sex offenders, on any criminal history, and we want to make sure that everyone who's living in any of our communities is safe. So we do everything possible to make sure that that occurs. There's no cost to join. There's no home ownership association fees. We At this, under our current model, something we might think about later on, but our current model, it's all rental. Folks come in on a year lease, and then they go month to month after that. So the question we have here, how do we protect residents from abuse and keep them safe? Throughout all of our buildings, we have a very elaborate cameras. They're not in the residence apartments, but they pretty much record what's going on. So we know who's going in and out of what apartments. So if something happens, the doors are all locked down with key cards like you would have in any other modern apartment community. All of our staff go through regular abuse and neglect training, and it's all overseen really by Medicaid and our adult and people with disabilities programs in the Portland metro area, so they're very involved in that. Residents have on hiring input employees. We not only like to get that input from our residents on them coming in as an employee, but we also want to hear that feedback from them as they mature through our employment with us and hear how they're doing, what types of development. We have resident meetings to hear what kind of things do our staff need training on, what are we not doing well enough, what can we do better. We really elicit that feedback from our residents because it's really important stuff. What kinds of level supports are available? Mike kind of talked a little bit about that. There's really nothing we won't attempt as long as it's not something an RN would need or a licensed staff. As we're finding more and more awesome things come out, such as wound vacs and other things which before people would have to go to a skilled facility. Now they can come home and They just require our staff to turn them a little bit more. We're actually adapting some other lifting and turning programs that actually don't require our staff to actually manually turn someone. We found working with one of our vendors that there's slings that we can use with our hoist that are ceiling mounted. Each of the units have a ceiling mounted hoist, so there's always that nice transition in and out of a wheelchair or whatever, so no one's getting dropped on the ground or any of those kinds of things. And staff aren't blowing their backs, our residents are safe. And that's really what we believe in highly, is safety for everyone. Opportunities for socialization and organized activities. We actually have a resident service coordinator who really her only function is to find what people want to do, and she connects them with that. Not only we do that, we have self-defense classes that come in, we have diabetic courses that come in, we're actually working with some psychiatrists and some sociologists for people who might need help in those areas. I don't think there's anything we haven't really dove into. I was just in contact this last week, which I'm excited about, of a person who, as part of a program in Portland, and helping people tell their own story and writing novels, and actually will be going into some of our programs and helping people do that. So we come to these kind of things hoping to be able to connect more and more with the community and hear what's out there and what we can get into our program, what we can tell about people. In Portland, we will come out and tell some people like, oh, you existed? Yeah, a little over 40 years now. So it's kind of interesting. So really our summary is, and really Bud Meyers' whole thing, and Mike really touched on heavily, is that really promoting that independence, having somebody be able to come into their own home, and it's their home. They can do whatever they would like in that home, and have those supports in place and work with other organizations when we can't provide that support to come and help them or get that community resource. So that's really what Quadink's about, is really making people independent in every aspect we can help those folks do so.
Mark, take it away.
Thanks. Hi, I'm gonna fly through this quickly. The first thing I want to say right off is I'm a member of the club. So I have a family member with a disability, lives in our home. This is my daughter, Emma. She has a chromosome 15 hiccup, and she's going to need living supports for the rest of her life. And she's 19 now, and about the time she turned 13 is when my wife and I really started focusing on her adult life. And it was thinking more about where she was going to live, but also how she was going to live. What did it look like? How did it feel? And I toured group homes. We saw some intentional apartment communities. Up here, they're called adult family homes. We took a 3-hour drive out of town and saw a ranch, which was actually pretty cool. And we were even having trouble articulating what we didn't like or what we found unacceptable about the places we visited. So I rebooted the conversation with my wife one day. I remember this was at Green Lake, and I said, if I was Warren Buffett, and she loves here to jump in to point out I am not by any means Warren Buffett, but I said, if we had unlimited resources, what would we build for Emma? What would it look like? And we were looking at it from that direction, and now suddenly we were able to articulate, to memorialize what we're looking for. And we came up with 7 things, and I'll list them, and you've probably heard all of them before, but this was the first time we were able to get it articulated. We wanted someplace that was safe. We wanted someplace that was permanent. We wanted Emma living in an inclusive environment, not where she was lonely. We wanted a place where her independence would be maximized, not overly restricted, so she would have the independence that was suitable to her. We wanted a place that was not 3 hours out of town. We wanted someplace that was urban. And because I'm not Warren Buffett, we had to be able to afford it. So I'm going to tell you now about Luna Azul, the project that I'm working on that resolved all 7 of these issues for us. This is what worked for us. It's an idea. But first, I have to tell you about pocket neighborhoods. So there is a pretty hoity-toity architect. He lives up on Langley, and he builds these neighborhoods. He calls them pocket neighborhoods, and they're really very cool. They're small cottage-sized homes, anywhere from 1,100 to 1,600 square feet, and they all have a really large front porch, big front porch, and they're always built facing each other around a shared common green. And they typically have a little clubhouse about the size of a garage or so where there's cocktails and barbecues for the residents and stuff. Another thing that is very cool about these is they never have garages. They always have detached parking. So Ross Chapin, the architect, points out that, well, because they're small, more people are spending more time on the porches, and because there's no garages, people have to walk in and out, and so they're passing people on the porches, and there's more neighborly interactions. And I saw this, and I thought, this is it. This is where I want my daughter to live. So, by the way, so I read about Ross Chapin in the New York Times. His book, Pocket Neighborhoods, is a bestseller on the Wall Street Journal book list. And I sent an email up there, and this had to have been like Joe Sixpack writing to Frank Lloyd Wright. I had no idea if I was going to even hear back. They wrote back to me within 3 hours, and they invited me up the following week. I got him on board, and I was able to, with his name, I was able to raise the equity to build this project in about 7 months. So so this is what we're building. We're not copying Ross Chapin's design. This is a Ross Chapin designed pocket neighborhood. And we're building 30 2- and 3-bedroom cottage homes on 4.5 acres around a pretty big clubhouse and pool. So now, let me tell you how this design resolved the 7 items that were important to us. So, safe. This community is walled and gated, has a controlled entry, and it has 24/7 overnight staff. There's no barbed wire, there's no turrets, and there's nobody walking around with a gun at night, but there is somebody there all night. And this was really the kind of safety that we thought was acceptable for us. Unlike anything we've seen in the country for adults with disabilities, we're not renting out the rooms. We are selling title to these homes. So once it's built, we sell them, we're gone. And so we're not really building Mark Roth's community. We're building a community for 30 homeowners. Now, I will not be worried about whether the rent is going to go up beyond my budget. I'm not going to be worried about whether new management is going to decide to renew my daughter's lease, or whether they're going to sell the home for a higher and better use. My daughter is going to have a permanent, lifetime solution. This was very critical to us. So inclusivity. I probably don't have to tell this crowd, the isolation that adults with disabilities often face is truly heartbreaking, and really so much of the motivation behind what we were trying to accomplish. We're marketing these homes to families who are in the club, who have intellectual or developmental or acquired disabilities in their family. But we're also marketing to people that have no disabilities. We have mothers moving in with their kids. We have families that we anticipate will be there as well. I envisioned a place where my daughter could be helped by some and she could help others. I couldn't bear the thought of her living with 3 other women who have the same disability she had. So we are intentionally marketing this to as broad, anybody's welcome. There's no age test, there's no acuity test, there's, if you want to live here. And by the way, under the Fair Housing Act, we can't discriminate on the basis of disability in any event, but we don't want to. These homes are being built on the supported housing concept. And so what that means is each family will orchestrate the in-the-home care that is required of the residents that live there. And so now I anticipate the state will pay for those services, but some people moving in are private pay. But what this means from our perspective, that we wanted Emma's independence maximized, was that Emma is going to have, I'm sorry, that's my daughter's name, Emma. Emma is going to have the care that is appropriate to Emma. She's going to have the freedoms and restrictions that a vendor is going to provide for Emma without so much regard as to what is necessary for the neighbor. This is the independence that we hope for. Emma will have the opportunity to be as autonomous as is suitable for Emma. I didn't mention this in the list when I was going through it, but this was a huge one. Choice and control was, maybe it's just me. The selection of roommates, that alone is a potentially gigantic issue and potentially catastrophic issue. And even if the roommates are suitable on day one, when somebody leaves and another roommate is dropped in a month or a year or 5 years later, can be a very big issue. So because we own the place, her mother and I and her caregivers and Emma will participate in selecting who that roommate might be. But it's more than roommates. What if Emma wants to stay out late? What if Emma wants to have an overnight guest? Or what if that overnight guest is me? What if Emma wants to have a dog, a pet, and if it's suitable and she could look after the dog? What if Emma wants to paint her room purple? These issues, they were beyond what I think we could rightly expect in any rental model. I don't think I could fairly ask a landlord to allow much of this, pets alone, perhaps roommates. But because we own the place, Emma and her family and her caregivers will control all of this. This is if you're familiar with, this is in Phoenix. It's on North 16th Street near the 101 freeway, if you're familiar with it. But it's close to vocational opportunities. It's close to urban amenities, recreation, museums, movies, shopping. But most importantly, it's close to us. It's not a by the way, we're moving. It's eventually. It is not a 3-hour drive out of town. Emma will still be part of the family. And this was very important to us too. And finally, okay, we've publicly established I'm not Warren Buffett. So we had to be able to afford this. And as I started, I'm a recovering attorney. I practiced for 27 years. And still, this was a big deal. How much would this cost? I found out that this is substantially more affordable than renting. I'm not going to run through this. This is on our website. If this is of interest to you, I would encourage you to go through it more slowly. It really is just making 3 points. Congregate living options for adults with disabilities, we're seeing start at about $3,000 a month nationally and going up, sometimes way up from there. I'm budgeting for 45 years for my daughter. That means if I was lucky enough to find it at just $3,000 a month, and we couldn't find any place, for example, in Phoenix, that was only $3,000 a month. But if I could find a place for $3,000 a month, and if the rent never increased over 45 years, just for simple math, I'd have to come up with over $1.6 million just for the rent. I can't afford it. I can't afford it. And that's before everything else, clothes and travel. For the cost that I'm going to, for about the money I'm going to spend on sending my other daughter to college and graduate school, a little more than that, depending on what school she gets into, I could own a home that I will own outright for Emma. The other point that this makes is, even if the cost of that home is financed with a traditional mortgage, right now I think we used about 5%, 20% down, including taxes, including insurance. The cost, the monthly cost is just over $2,000 a month. Then we we have homeowners association dues, and that's how we pay for the overnight staff, and we have a full-time director. But I'm flying through this week. I'll happily discuss these things. Even if you add in the HOA, it's still just coming up to about $3,000 a month. But if you get a roommate, which my daughter will have, and if we charge less than half of that $3,000 a month that congregate living places are getting more than, the monthly cost of ownership just comes way, way down. And finally, of course, with ownership comes equity. So at the end of the road, if my younger daughter survives her older sister, she'll be able to keep this as an income property or sell it and take out an appreciated value. This is what finally got me to develop Luna Azul. We realized we can't afford rental, we can afford to buy. But looking, once we were able to articulate this, we saw it didn't exist. We're under construction in Phoenix. The clubhouse is already framed. The first cottage home is framed. They've just poured the foundations on the second duplex that's going up. So that's how we solved our 7 wish list items. I know it's a great solution for Emma. She's very excited to move in. And I suspect, and based on the number of reservations and the interest we've seen so far, I know it's going to be a great solution for others who are in the club with me. Thanks.
My name is Denise Klein, and I am a local, state, national expert on aging. That's been my field for the last 40-some years. I happen to know a little bit about disability as well, but my primary focus is on aging. And so this model that I'm going to present is pretty much anticipates that the people who join these villages will be people who are probably at least 50. I don't think anybody would have any problem with somebody younger joining. We actually have people in their 40s, and our oldest members are in their 90s. So it's a model that supports people to age in community. And mainly, it's a strategy to age in place. It's possible that this strategy could be adapted either in an inclusive fashion or separately for people with disability. There's certainly no reason why it couldn't be. The primary focus is on reducing social isolation. And social isolation, of course, is a modern disease that began when people left farms for urban areas. And then after World War II, they moved to the suburbs. And the people that we saw every day were not people who lived near us. After people retire, of course, they have even a greater risk of social isolation. It's really bad. It can actually kill you, social isolation. All kinds of consequences. And you can sort of, the dynamic is familiar to all of us who've been ill or experiencing great difficulty. You get more isolated to the point where you realize that nobody really knows you or cares whether you get out of bed each day. And at the beginning of that process, you might just be depressed, but after that, you start to question whether there's really any point to go on. What is my reason for living? Everybody is at risk of that. There are lots of options for people as they age to remain engaged, and I think I'll just skip to the last one because it's the one that I'm most interested in, and that is that you can start and join a village, which is for people wherever they are living, but within some close geographic proximity. So of course the whole idea of a village is that it's something that's very old. It's been around for a long time, the concept. And this is just a rehashing of the same old concept. People living near each other, people of varying ages. We have at least 3 generations in our village. And they socialize, discuss, learn, and get help from each other and from volunteers with practical tasks and information about all kinds of things. So villages aren't a place. People live near but not with each other. Although there's nothing to stop people from doing home sharing. That is not a feature of my village at this point. We bring services to people rather than people having to go and find services on their own. And the first village was started in Boston about 16 years ago. There are 230 of these in the United States and maybe another 130 in development. It actually takes some years to develop a village, as you might guess. I mean, if the folks in this room wanted to form a village, you can just imagine the kinds of conversations that would go on and how long it might take for some structure to emerge from that. There are two major purposes, and they are completely intertwined. The fostering meaningful engagement with other people and offering assistance to each other, assistance by members and volunteers, and a small paid professional staff. That would be me, very small. Also, the people who join a village, if you ask them what it is and what they're getting out of it, they'll all tell you something completely different. It's kind of like the blind men and the elephant. So people will mention the thing that happened yesterday that they felt excited about, or the most recent cultural experience that they enjoyed. And so it's kind of a puzzle, because it's really what you as an individual take from it that's the meaning at some level. And it's not just one thing for everybody. It's very different, of course, from some models that are more uniform. The longer you're in a village, the more ways to connect you discover. Members get to know each other, of course. They get to know each other's families. They get to know the volunteers. And we only have probably, I'm going to say, a half a dozen volunteers who aren't members of the village. So we are largely our own support system. We interact with people in the neighborhood and the broader community. We open all of our events to anyone. Anybody can come to our events. Doesn't cost anything. We like that idea. It's a great way to market the village. People may join, they may decide to donate. So why not? And we try out new things with support from each other. This weekend, it's not exactly a new thing, but I haven't done it in a while. I'm going to be doing pumpkin carving. I really don't want to do pumpkin carving. I really don't like carving, and I really don't like pumpkins, and I really don't like Halloween very well. But I do like being with the other people who are going to carve the pumpkins. That's the whole trick. So I'll go anywhere. I will do anything. Very few things that I won't try. There are 4 villages that are open in King County, and a 5th one that I'm not sure what they're doing, but they're in Bellevue, and they're doing a pilot. And I'm sure they're going to be very successful in the long run. So that would be a 5th one. They have a lot. So this is actually not updated. Our membership is in the low 80s now. So we're the 3rd line. The Nest, which serves the area that we're in right now, Northeast Seattle, at least when this was done, had 111 regular members, and they have a social membership that is different. We only have one kind of membership. We want people to be social members, so we don't want to give them a price break for just being a social member. And I'll talk a bit about the dues and how that works in a minute. Each village has its own unique character. You can say that they have certain things in common, but when you dig a little deeper, you see that they're quite different. They have a culture, they have a personality, and it probably has to do with the people who started it. You know, there's a lot of individual variation. So we say, of course, if you've seen one village, you've seen one village. And that's what you know. The kind of membership thing I was talking about is one example. We don't want to have just social members because we think that the socializing is probably the most important thing. The other villages are like, well, maybe somebody doesn't want to pay the full dues and they don't want any services. So we'll just say that they're social members. But in my opinion, the social part is every bit as valuable as any of the practical things that people do for each other. In my particular village, because of the way it was organized, most of the people who joined had been citizen activists for their lifetime. And so that gives a particular quality to our village that is different from the other villages. People wanted to continue being active and give back to each other and to the full community. Our average age is 74, so relatively young for a group of old people. I'm older than the average. But when I joined, I believe I was the average. About half of the people live alone, and half of them live with others, various others. The full dues are $600 a year for one person and $900 a year for a household of any size. But 27% of our members pay less than the full dues. So if you wanted to join, and this idea really intrigued you, and you said, I'm crazy about this idea, but I certainly can't afford $600, we would say, and what would you like to pay? And basically, that would be your dues. And you would be one of this 27%. So quite a lot of people are just willing to pay the full dues or have enough money to pay the full dues or who knows what. Now we have clusters of members within our geographic area. 50% of our members live in zip code 98112. That would be part of Capitol Hill and part of Montlake and Madison Park. So that's more than half of our members. And then we have similar clusters elsewhere, and we call them pods. And so we organize activities at the pod level as well as at the village level. The things we do together we do in small groups, medium-sized groups, and a few things in large groups. The smaller groups are what people really like. Very few people, when you say, would you rather be in a small group or a very large group, will say, I'd rather be in a very large group. There are those who would, but not too many. The essential feature of every engagement and of every activity is connection. People connecting with each other. And what I feel after I've gone to one of our events is what I would call a mixture of joy and contentment. It's an interesting, the joy is kind of an upper and the contentment is kind of a, grounded, pleased sort of feeling. But I also feel very secure that if something goes wrong, people have my back. And we were figuring that she and I met 2 years ago when my husband was in inpatient rehab for a stroke here at the University of Washington Hospital. And when, in order to have that rehab program, they say to the caretaker, so you understand that he can only go to this special program, this hospital, for rehab if you will be with him 24/7 for 3 months. Will you? And I go, absolutely. Oh no, I was not planning to be the person 24/7 for 3 months. I knew it even then. So 15 different people from my village would come in and stay with him for between 2 and 4 hours, several times a week. So I wasn't the only 24/7 person. So that kind of thing gives you a nice sense that when things go awry, you've got people. People say, well, what do I get for my membership fee? Well, actually what you get is, you get my time and you get, supplies and wine and all kinds of things that we buy for these events and so forth. But really, to me, and the most important thing you get is you get other people who inspire you to engage and help organize ways to do that. Because if you have to organize all your own activities, you're going to do far less. You're going to do a lot of TV and read books and talk to people, but you're not going to do a lot of other interesting things. And it's hard to describe that because it's hard to say to people, what you get for your fee is we address your potential social isolation. And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Besides our own events, which are free, we explore the arts, music, history, and culture in the community around us. So those are specific activities that we do. A month or two ago, we do a lot of email communication. We do every Monday I send out a newsy thing. And I said, so I want to go see Black Klansman. Who wants to go? Turns out 3 or 4 other people wanted to go, and we went within a week or so, and then we debriefed over drinks and hors d'oeuvres. So those are little pop-up things that happen, but there are also things that take a lot longer to organize and are much more elaborate. Lots of discussion groups, lectures, many things. We have those pod events for the people who live near each other. And then we have salons, which are small gatherings in people's homes. like 20 people to hear an interesting speaker, very informal. Always food. Food is, you know, it makes everything nicer. And we have larger events at the Central Area Senior Center, which is like our clubhouse for that sort of thing. It's right in the middle of Seattle. On the services side, and for some villages, services are really the point of the whole thing. That's not so much for us. Our services are things that friends do for each other, but it's fairly remarkable. If you have good friends, they'll do a lot for you. And it's very individually tailored. So if somebody needs something, they describe it to me, and I do my very best to figure out how to get it to them. And I'd say 99% of the time, we can arrange it. When you need more expertise than what we can provide among ourselves, then we have vetted vendors that our members have used that we can recommend. Housekeepers, you know, repair people of all kinds and that sort of thing. We can address any type of need with information, services, or referrals. We don't limit service. Some villages do. You can only have 6 rides a month. But what if you need 14? So, you know, we don't limit it. And there's no one right way to request a service. You can bump into someone on the street, me or somebody else, and remember that you needed something, and this happens fairly regularly, and mention it, and then the word comes back. And that's, you know, the most unusual way to request services. Email is good, phone is good. Those are the main ways. We are member-driven, and our board is composed of active members. When I ran a social services agency, I wondered if all those staff were really needed. And now I've found a model where all those staff are not really needed, because you can actually do it with just regular people.
So again, thanks you guys. I think that these are really interesting, very different approaches, very different models. And I want to open it up for questions. So what questions do people have? And they could be directed, we can direct to everybody or individual. So the question was, the caregivers for folks who live in the Luna Azul community, would they be able to afford to live there, or would they, live in the surrounding area? And I'm going to give you both of these, and you have to hold them both.
Some people are anticipate having full-time live-in care, and so they will own the home, and that caregiver will live in the home. I very much relate to what you're saying, though, because we live north of here right now, and it's harder to find in-home help on the North County. We're close to the Snohomish County line than what we understand to be in South County. Because of the cost of living up there, and it's not a really high-paying job. This isn't in Scottsdale, Arizona. This isn't in Paradise Valley. This is in North Phoenix. And so the answer is they can, and the other answer is it's right off the freeway, so it's actually not that bad a commute to get there in any event. I will also finally add, and there's an army of they're called qualified vendors in Arizona. I understand in California, once you find an in-home care provider, like you hang on to that person because it's very hard to find a replacement. In Arizona, there's an army of them. And it is not difficult. And we wanted to be able to choose and replace vendors ourselves rather than moving in, for example, into a group home where you marry that vendor and your only remedy is to move if the services aren't good. One of the reasons we chose Arizona is because of the availability of so much in-home care.
The question was, what are our limits for income? It really depends how many people are in the household, and we have to have a certain percentage in our HUD projects. I talk about like LIHTC versus HUD because they do have different requirements. In our HUD projects, 50% of our folks living in that project have to be below the poverty level. Above that is fine. We actually have people who have assets of $500,000 and $600,000, and they come in. Typically, those people aren't qualifying for Medicaid and having to pay for services out of pocket, which then becomes a medical expense, which reduces their rent. So it's kind of different. LIHTC, it's very sliding scale. You could really look at 50% wherever your income comes into, and 50% of that income could be what you're paying in rent versus a HUD, which is the flat 30. So if you're making $1 million, you're going to be paying 30% of that out. So may not be the best alternative for you.
The question is whether the upkeep or maintenance of the cottage homes, which is platted as a condominium, is the owner's responsibility. Inside the home, yes. Outside the home, common area maintenance, taking care of the clubhouse, paying the staff, the overnight staff, the full-time director, et cetera. That's all paid for by homeowners association dues. We bumped that up as much because our thought. So we take care of the roofs. We paint the homes. We take because it was my thought that parents that are going to buy one of these just want to know that things are just handled.
Yeah, she wants to know could people in a village share, for example, personal caregivers? They definitely could, and it kind of all turns on whether you have a critical mass of people who have the same needs, roughly. And so far, with 80 members, we can make matches, of two people. Somebody's got a dog and wants to go on a trip, and somebody else has a dog and wants to go on a trip, and so they can exchange pet care. But at this point, we don't have a critical mass of people who need caregivers. And when they do, it's likely to be episodic. So post-knee surgery, or a stroke, or but we did have somebody who was dying and needed some caregivers. So it's it's finding the critical mass of people who can share. But yeah, the facilitation of it is, the potential is there. I mean, we can do that easily.
So the question was, do we have physical gyms? In each of our buildings, we do have a small area. In our newest building in Station 162, we actually do have a pretty good sized gym, and things from free weights to a bike that the seat comes apart. So if you want to be able to use your arms, there's bands, there's arm weights. Yeah. And we're actually looking at expanding that more in all of our other buildings and getting someone to come in and work with our folks in developing programs, strength training programs, or whatever type of program they would like to utilize.
So I like to go to the gym, and my wife is also physically fit, and so I'm interested in the clubhouse having a gym. I very deliberately did not build a gym because we're not building the clubhouse for me. So it's there's perfect areas to build a gym in there. And if the residents and their caregivers and their families want to see a gym, then the homeowners will vote, and they can get equipment donated without any trouble. But I am adamant that I'm not programming what happens in there. A number of people might just want a treadmill in their home. A number of people might have mobility issues and just not be interested. So I'm not going to decide what goes there. The residents will.
Yeah.
So the question was,
I wear hearing aids.
how would you start the beginnings of a pod or the beginnings of a village? What do you need to do? Because we have a bunch of people here that could probably be a pod or a village.
Yes. Yeah. So you need, I'd say, let's just say 4 people. So those 4 people get together, and then they figure out who else they could bring in, and then you have more people. And there's quite a lot of material available and quite a lot of sources of expert help to serve as, resources for that sort of thing. So, but the website also has documents and all kinds of interesting things on it. We have a documents library. You have to join I forget, I think for $100 you can join the national website and have access to all their documents, but you can also just get documents from people around here.
So included in the cost of the HOA is hiring a full-time director and full-time assistant director. They will orchestrate the activities. You know, they came up with a sample calendar of activities, how it might look, and I have a feeling that clubhouse will get a lot more use than what you might see in a brand new condo going up across the street here.
Yeah.
I pushed back on that. I didn't want a sample calendar, but others made me, and I surrendered. And the reason was, just what I was saying, I don't know the acuity, I don't know the personalities, I don't know the ages of everyone moving in yet. So I didn't want to communicate this is the kind of activities that will be there, because I don't know what will be there. But what I built was a facility where all manner of activities could happily, easily take place. And that'll be orchestrated, you know, by the director in association with the residents and their families and caregivers. We anticipate activities for families too, for the neighborhood, lectures, mindfulness classes, inviting the kids in the neighborhood to a pool party. My wife wants to have Friday night happy hours with mocktails. I pointed out they're adults and perhaps there should be cocktails, and she told me to shut up.
Please join me in thanking all of our guests tonight for the great information. We really appreciate it.